Magnavox Odyssey, the first console ever made. Every single gaming console you have ever touched exists because of a box that could barely display two white dots on a screen. Meet the Magnavox Odyssey, released in September 1972, designed by an engineer named Ralph Baer. It cost $99.95. That is roughly $770 today. And it had no sound, no color, and no real graphics. The game was literally two dots and a line. To make the games look like anything, the box came with transparent plastic sheets you taped over your TV screen to act as the game environment. Seriously, tape on your TV. It also came with dice, cards, and poker chips, because apparently the engineers were not sure if the electronic part was going to be enough. Magnavox sold 350,000 units before discontinuing it in 1975. It did not make a huge splash, but one of its games, a simple ping pong simulation, inspired a young engineer named Nolan Bushnell to build Pong. And Pong launched Atari, and Atari launched an industry. Not bad for a box with two dots. Atari 2600, when gaming entered the living room. If the Odyssey was the spark, the Atari 2600 was the explosion. Launched in 1977 for $199, it was the first console most people actually brought home. The reason was simple: interchangeable cartridges. You bought one machine and you could swap games in and out forever. Space Invaders, Pitfall, Asteroids. The living room became an arcade you never had to leave. By 1982, Atari was generating over $2 billion a year. Then the company got greedy, let anyone publish anything, and the market flooded with terrible games. Revenue crashed from $3.2 billion in 1982 to $100 million by 1985, a drop of nearly 97%. Thousands of unsold cartridges, including the notoriously bad E.T. game, were buried in a landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico. It sounds like a joke. They actually dug them up in 2014 to confirm it was real. The video game industry was basically dead. NES, the console that saved the entire gaming industry. Nintendo had a problem. They had a great console, called the Famicom in Japan, but every American retailer they approached refused to stock it. The words video game console had become synonymous with garbage, so Nintendo did something brilliant. They stopped calling it a console. They called it an entertainment system. They called the cartridges game packs. They bundled it with a toy robot called ROB to get it placed in toy stores instead of electronics aisles. They launched in New York City in October 1985, sold out, went nationwide in 1986, and by 1988, Nintendo controlled 70% of the video game market. The NES did not just sell consoles, it introduced the Nintendo seal of quality, a guarantee that every game on the system had been approved and tested. No more garbage flooding the shelves. Games like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and Metroid became cultural benchmarks. The industry that had died came fully back to life. Nintendo had not just saved gaming, they had essentially invented the modern version of it. Sega Genesis versus SNES, the first real console war. Until 1989, Nintendo had the market to itself. Then Sega released the Genesis and started one of the greatest rivalries in entertainment history. Sega had a mascot built for speed, Sonic the Hedgehog, who was faster, cooler, and had more attitude than Mario. Sega ran ads that directly mocked Nintendo. They used the phrase blast processing to imply their hardware was faster, which was essentially marketing nonsense. But it worked. Kids argued on playgrounds about which console was better the same way people argue about phones today. Nintendo answered with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or Super NES, launching in Japan in 1990 and in North America in 1991. It had richer colors, better sound, and games like Super Mario World and The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, that are still considered masterpieces. By the end of their generation, the Super NES sold around 49 million units, and the Genesis sold around 35 million. Nintendo won on numbers, but Sega proved that Nintendo could be challenged, and that competition was exactly what gaming needed. PlayStation 3D gaming arrives. Sony had originally been working with Nintendo to build a CD-ROM add-on for the Super NES. Nintendo pulled out of the deal. Sony decided to build a full console themselves, which was bold, considering they had no experience in gaming hardware. The PlayStation launched in Japan in December 1994, and in North America in September 1995 for $299. It used CD-ROMs instead of cartridges, discs that held far more data and cost much less to manufacture. And it could display three-dimensional graphics that made every cartridge-based game look ancient overnight. Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, Tomb Raider, Gran Turismo, games that felt like movies, with cinematic cutscenes, 3D worlds, and stories that lasted 30 to 40 hours. The PlayStation sold 102 million units. The Sega Saturn, Sega's competing console, sold around 9 million. Sega never fully recovered from that mismatch. Nintendo 64, Mario 64, invents modern 3D gaming. Nintendo watched Sony sell 3D games on CD-ROMs and decided the correct response was to stick with cartridges. Cartridges cost more to manufacture, held less data, and loaded faster. Nintendo bet on the speed and packed Super Mario 64 into the launch lineup. It paid off. Super Mario 64 was the game that proved 3D worlds could feel completely natural to move through. Full camera control, open levels, genuine exploration. It was not just a good game, it was a blueprint that designers still study today. The Nintendo 64 launched in 1996 at $199 and sold 34 million units over its lifetime. Solid, but well behind the PlayStation. The cartridge decision hurt the console's relationship with third-party developers, who preferred the cheaper, higher-capacity discs. Many studios took their games to Sony instead. Nintendo won the game design argument. Sony won the market. Sega Dreamcast, online gaming pioneer, Sega's last console. In 1998, Sega launched the Dreamcast, and it was genuinely ahead of its time. It was the first home console with a built-in modem for online multiplayer. Years before Xbox Live, years before PlayStation Network. Games like Phantasy Star Online let players from around the world connect and play together in real time on a home console. In 1999, nobody had done that before. The Dreamcast also had a web browser, a memory card with a tiny built-in screen, and a library of games that critics loved. And it sold only 9 million units. Sega had burned through consumer trust with too many failed add-ons and spin-off products in the years before, and when Sony announced the PlayStation 2, people stopped buying Dreamcasts and waited. Sega discontinued the Dreamcast in 2001 and exited the hardware business entirely. They became a third-party game developer, and they have been one ever since. PlayStation 2, best-selling console in history. The PlayStation 2 is the best-selling video game console ever made. 155 million units sold. No other console has come close. It launched in 2000 at $299, and it played DVDs, which, in 2000, was a huge deal. Many households bought a PlayStation 2 specifically as their DVD player, with gaming as the bonus. That one decision sold more consoles than almost any game ever could. The PS2 library was enormous, over 4,000 titles, including Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas, God of War, Shadow of the Colossus, and Kingdom Hearts. Sony kept selling it for 13 years until January 2013, long after the PlayStation 3 had already launched. No console in history has dominated a generation as completely as the PS2 dominated the 2000s. Xbox. Microsoft enters and changes the industry forever. In 2001, Microsoft, a company that made operating systems and office software, decided to make a gaming console. The industry laughed. The original Xbox was enormous, heavy, and ran on a modified version of Windows. But it had a built-in hard drive, which no console had done before, and it launched with Halo, Combat Evolved, a first-person shooter so good that people bought the console just to play it. Microsoft followed up in 2002 with Xbox Live, a paid online multiplayer service that let you play against other people, chat with them, and track your achievements. It standardized what online console gaming looked like. Sony and Nintendo both scrambled to catch up. Microsoft had no gaming history, no established franchises, and no fan base. They entered an entrenched market and fundamentally changed it anyway. Wii, motion controls bring gaming to everyone. Nintendo looked at the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Both powerful, both expensive, both aimed at the same core gaming audience, and decided to do something completely different. The Wii launched in 2006 for $249, half the price of its competitors, with controllers you swung and waved like physical objects. Tennis, bowling, golf, games grandparents could understand and play at Christmas. Nintendo called this strategy expanding the audience, and it worked beyond any reasonable expectation. The Wii sold 102 million units. It outsold the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It brought gaming to people who had never owned a console in their lives. Eventually, the novelty of motion controls faded and the core gaming audience moved back to traditional controllers. But Nintendo had proven something important. The biggest market in gaming was not the people already playing. It was everyone else. PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, the digital era begins. The PlayStation 4 launched in November 2013 at $399. The Xbox One launched the same month at $499. Both were powerful machines with fast processors and large hard drives. But the story of this generation was not hardware. It was digital distribution. For the first time, you could buy any game as a download without ever touching a disc. Both consoles had streaming services, subscription plans, and digital storefronts. Physical game sales started declining and have not recovered since. The Xbox One had a rocky start after Microsoft announced it would restrict used game sales, a decision that caused such public backlash they reversed it before launch. The PlayStation 4 went on to sell over 117 million units, winning the generation comfortably. But the bigger shift was invisible. Gaming was quietly becoming a service you subscribed to, not just a box you bought. Nintendo Switch. Console and handheld in one. Nintendo looked at their previous console, the Wii U, which had sold a disappointing 13 million units, and decided to start over with one bold idea. The Switch was a console that you could dock to your TV at home, then pull out and take anywhere as a handheld device, with no change required. Same game, same save file, same experience, whether on your couch or on a train. It launched in March 2017 at $299, with The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild on day one. That game alone was enough. The Switch became the second best-selling console of all time, with 155 million units sold, behind only the PlayStation 2. Nintendo had been counted out after the Wii U. They responded by reinventing what a console even was. PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, the SSD changes everything. Both the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X launched in November 2020, and both used the same technology as their biggest upgrade, a custom NVMe solid-state drive that loaded games in seconds instead of minutes. On a PlayStation 4, loading into a large open world could take 30 seconds to a minute. On a PlayStation 5, the same world loaded in under 2 seconds. It sounds like a minor convenience.
What do we got?
In practice, it changed how games were designed, because developers no longer had to hide loading behind slow elevator rides and long corridors. Both consoles launched during a global chip shortage that made them nearly impossible to find for over a year. People paid scalpers double and triple the retail price. The PlayStation 5 launched at $499 and the Xbox Series X at $499. Neither company had a smooth launch, but both consoles were worth the wait once supply stabilized. Steam Deck, PC gaming goes fully portable. In February 2022, Valve released a handheld device that ran the full PC gaming library. Not a simplified mobile version, not a cloud stream, but an actual computer you held in your hands and played real PC games on. The Steam Deck started at $399. It ran a custom version of Linux and accessed your existing Steam account, meaning if you already owned thousands of PC games, you could play them on a handheld the next day. It was not perfect. Battery life was limited. Some games needed manual configuration to run properly. The screen on the base model was not great, but it proved that PC gaming, historically chained to desks and expensive hardware, could be portable without compromise. Nintendo had shown the hybrid concept worked for console gaming. Valve showed it worked for PC. The line between living room, handheld, and desktop gaming, once completely clear, had effectively disappeared. There is another video waiting for you right now. Go watch it next.